Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
Hello, and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast. This is your host and founder of Greenlight Guru, John Speer, and things are a little bit different today. As we promised you, joining me as co-host is Etienne Nichols. Etienne is one of our medical device gurus. And Etienne, I guess I should ask you, I know you're kind of taking on a new role. Are you still a guru? Is that still an appropriate title?
Yeah, someone actually asked me that yesterday, and they said, you're kind of straddling two fences right now. So it's kind of the situation. But yeah, still medical device guru.
All right. Well, welcome back, and I'm looking forward to diving into the conversation. And I'm excited because we have a guest joining us today, Mark Rutkiewicz. Hopefully I said that okay. I know I practiced that a little bit, but Mark is with Innovize and Consiliso. Mark, welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Etienne.
A great place to start before we dive into today's topic is, can you just take maybe a couple moments to give folks a little background about who you are and Innovize and Consiliso?
Sure. Yeah. My name is, you said Mark Rutkiewicz. I've been in the medical device industry about 35 years. I've worked at about 6 different companies doing everything: implantable defibrillators, implantable heart occluders, MRI machines, AEDs, disposable software, hardware, sterile, non-sterile. Been in that industry. Part of it has been mainly designing quality systems. So that's been my focus for these years, redesigning systems, truly trying to make things integrated. And so that's what Consiliso is. I wrote a couple of books on the topic of how to design integrated business processes for medical device companies to really make it easier. I was an engineer, and I hated the way it, finding information, and it's like, this can be a better way of doing this. And so over the years, I've developed this methodology, and that's what I wrote. So currently I'm also a VP of quality at Innovize. We're a contract manufacturer in the Twin Cities. Most of the medical device companies, all the big ones, we're a supplier to. We make all different kinds of parts, more converting using films and adhesives.
Yeah, very cool. And Mark, I remember before I hand it to Etienne to introduce our topic for today, but I remember one of the first times that I met you. I think it was at an MD&M West or something like that. It was one of those types of shows, and you mentioned this concept of Consiliso, and you were passionate about it. I'm like, all right, so if there's another nerd out there that's as passionate about quality systems as I am, and he's got a book that he's written about it, I'm going to check this out. And I read the book, and I was like, I found myself putting little highlights and markers all over the damn thing. And I was like, it is a really good book. So you've condensed a somewhat boring and nebulous topic of quality systems into actually, for a medical device nerd, into somewhat of a fascinating read. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you liked it.
A guy's serious about his work when he wrote 2 books on the topic. So
I know, right? And folks will provide a link to that in the notes that accompany the show. It's a relatively quick read. It's not boring, and it's not super expensive either. So I encourage you to get a copy. I mean, it's more of a philosophy type book.
Right.
That's the way I interpret it. So
yeah, the second book is a textbook.
Yeah,
500 pages.
That's
how to do it.
Intense, right? Yeah. All right, Etienne, where we're going to go today? What are we going to dive into?
So when we first talked to Mark, there are lots of different topics we could cover. So one, though, that is a topic, it's always a question mark in a lot of people's mind. That is UDI, unique device identification. So I was curious to know a little bit more about what Mark would have to say on this topic. So Mark, what do you think? Do you have any just thoughts on this right now?
Yeah, UDI. I mean, everybody thinks it's, oh my gosh, there's this new thing going on. And it's like, oh my God, the FDA is requiring it. It means it's compliance. They got to set these systems. And, going back and peeling back the onion, what it is, it's like, okay, the grocery stores figured this out in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And now medical device, we're a lot more complex. It's like, oh my God, this is painful. It's like, it's the same thing as scanning the parts at the grocery store. So about 15 years ago, I sat in on one of these sessions that, the UDI, team that was, developing the standards before, this is way before the FDA even required this. And they were talking about the concept of this UDI. And now every part that you use in the hospital room has a barcode on it. And they actually did a study in Japan that, mainly on the drug side, but the device side is sort of the same thing. It's like, if this patient was prescribed something, then you scan everything that they do. And if somebody made a mistake, they would catch it right away. And what they found is they eliminated tons of mistakes because of that. So the same concept, pharma's been doing it. And then, now in the US for medical device, we're required to do it. And so the concept is basically you send a unique ID. That ID is stored in a central database in the world so that anybody who wants to know if they scan that, they know what it is. That's the basic concept behind it. Now, there's a lot of other things around it. And some of it's, why medical device does it and how it's been implemented is different because we sell products all over the world. And different countries have different requirements. When the US came out with their UDI requirement, they basically defined that you can have 3 different types of identifiers that are available for you to, as a manufacturer, to use. You can use the GS1 codes, which is the worldwide one. You can use the health industry barcode HIBIC codes, or you can use, there's also the blood bank. And so that was really designed just for the blood banks. So really there's 2 choices. And the reason there's 2 of them, HIBIC was original. So HIBIC came in for health code beforehand. And basically what it was, some companies started using it because it allowed you to have any length characters in your barcode. You can have like 30 character barcode. And then it was sort of free. So you pay a little bit, but you didn't pay a lot of money for it. But the difference is because it has a long barcode, it also you have to have a checksum when you do barcodes. And the checksum identifier for HIBIC is really poorly defined because you can use any characters in it. Alphanumeric, you can use dashes, you can use ampersands. I had a problem one time. I had a product using a HIBIC code, and the checksum was a space character. Wow. So you couldn't even tell it was there. It's like trying to find it. So HIBIC, it was there because of historical reasons. That's why they kept it in there. And some companies have to convert over. Europe is requiring that you go to GS1. It's a standardized code for those identifiers. That it's a specific length always, and it's all just numbers.
Yeah.
So it's really straightforward and it's easy to program in computers and stuff like that versus having a variable length field. And so now everybody's starting to do it, requiring it. I think the last ones were there were some class 1 exempts that were they could actually use UPC. UPC codes, universal is what's in the grocery stores and everything. It's sort of some class 1s could be UPC instead of having the other codes that we're using. And then nowadays too, a lot of people are switching to the 2-dimensional barcodes, the data matrix, because it takes up less space. Right. So you can do the data matrix one, and you can put different information in it. And so if you read through the standards, there's like hundreds of different pieces of information you can encode in a barcode. But just stripping it all back, what's required is you need to have for your product a number that identifies that product so that when somebody looks it up, they can find it. Now, that number, one of the things that when I was in the standards committee listening to what these guys were saying, part of it is really need to understand rules of interchangeability. And we'll talk about that at a later time on bombs. But if you want to be able to tell these ones apart, even though it's similar type products, you might want to assign it a different number. And so that's really the key there. And one of the interesting things about the GS1 barcode is it's like 13 character barcode. And when you get one, you need to determine how many codes you want to assign by your company. Yeah. And it's an order of magnitude. You can have 10 codes, 100 codes, 1,000 codes, 10,000 codes, 100,000 codes. And that's you pay for what you're going to use. And that's basically what it is. And so trying to manage all those numbers. And so if you're a big company, you're going to have, you want to put this all into your systems that you use for managing your bill of materials and your, how you sell products and stuff like that. You want to manage it that way. And that's sort of my thing on Consiliso is integrating it. So don't do this in a tool over here and manage this over here. And then you tell the FDA this over here. And then it's like, how do you keep them all aligned? So you want to try and integrate them all together. So don't try and develop a separate system, trying to integrate this together. Now, the 2 aspects of FDA is you need to get a number. So you go to one of these organizations and you get a number.
So it sounds like just just to interrupt real quick. So you mentioned GS1 and Inhibit. So I would say, just to kind of sum that up, sounds like you strongly recommend GS1 then.
Yeah. Well, Europe's going to require it.
Right.
FDA allowed both, but everybody's using it now. So, I mean, some of the bigger companies, I know some orthopedics and stuff, were developing this a long time because they have so many different configurations. It was easier, but going to that is probably going to have to, be probably putting dual codes on it for a while to transition. It'll be easier, and you'll be able to get it all into a data matrix barcode versus having to maintain this.
A data matrix. The difference between a data matrix and a QR code. What are your thoughts there? I hear people get
you get them intermixed. They're both two dimensional, so it's a little box with a bunch of dots in it. And actually, I've seen some stuff. I've seen some horribly printed QR codes, data matrix, and they can read. I mean, your phone can read them. I mean, 15 years ago, it's like, I need a special reader. Well, nowadays, anybody's phone can read these things.
We all have.
So the QR code has 3 targets in it. So you look at a QR code, you'll see like 3 little circles with a dot in them. That's a QR code. Data matrix will have 2 solid lines on 2 of the edges. So that's a data matrix. That's really how you can tell them apart. And the data matrix, the more information you have, the bigger the data matrix can be. So it'll encode more data. So it'll scale in size. If you have, because typically most companies I've seen is you have your identifier, G10, global trade identification number. And then you typically add 2 more pieces of information. One's your lot or serial number, and one's like an expiration date.
Yeah.
That's sort of the key. Those basic 3 are really what you need.
Mark,
so beyond that.
Mark, you mentioned that like when this first kind of became a requirement in our industry a few years back. To your point, this isn't new tech. This isn't, it's been in food and other places for a long, long time. But I remember at the time I was working with a med device company, as a consultant, trying to help them navigate the whole UDI process. And it was complicated, not because it was hard per se, but it was complicated because the process was poorly defined. The information from FDA was, I generally FDA, those that listen to the Global Medical Device podcast know I'm very much a fan of FDA, but this particular rollout, it was not well done. And, I'm trying to find information because I'm interested in trying to ensure that we're meeting the compliance requirements for UDI. I understand the importance of it, but the information out there was terrible. It was really terrible, and I hope things have gotten better.
Not really.
And that's so much.
I mean, because it's a multifaceted type thing. So you're the company, so you have to know your interchangeability of your parts yourself. You have to deal with this third party for assigning a number. Then once you get that defined, then you have to tell the FDA. So if you sell in the US, then you have to tell the FDA, here's my product. Here's its ID. And then here's 40 other attributes they want on your product. So they never asked you those attributes when you make the submission. It's like, well, it's in my submission. No, they don't ask you. Is it sterile? Is in that data field? It's in text. Mm-hmm. So you submit this stuff. So the FDA's submission process should integrate that into your UDI submission. But they built a whole separate database to track UDI information. So now when you do this, you have to answer these 40 questions for your product. And so what a lot of companies did, there's a lot of third-party companies got out there. It's like, we'll do it for you because they'll build their own database, work with you, assign numbers, and then they'll auto-load this into the FDA database. That's what a lot of companies do. It's like, I'm going to outsource it because I don't want to deal with this. Because you have to, if you really want to do it right, your internal systems, you need to design your system so that when you create a SKU object that describes what you're going to sell, the G10 number should be on there. And then these 40 other attributes that the FDA wants should be loaded on that so you can just extract it.
Yeah.
And you have to redesign, some companies, you have to totally redesign your computer systems to do that. So they don't want to do that. So they'll build another tool. And now Now you got to get interfaces and other things happening. So that's why it became complicated, because they want to collect information about the products. Now Europe, in the new EduMed database, they're trying, I have no idea where they're at. I really haven't dug into what they're doing, but the concept is everything is in one database. You register your company and your company has IDs. You register your products as part of submission. And then that UDI information is linked there. And then, every complaint is tied to that product and the company, and any recall is tied to the complaint, and it's all tied in one gigantic database.
Well, I mean, but philosophically, the benefit of a UDI, I think, is huge.
Absolutely.
That connectivity globally. I hope we get there as an industry, because the UDI, the databases that have been long talked about for EU MDR, they sound amazing. I can't wait till that becomes a reality and kind of connect all this data and information, because it can be complicated, I think, as a med device company. I know most med device professionals, they want to do the right thing, but they don't know where to go, or what the process is, or what this regulatory body requires, and how to feed information there. The process hasn't been architected or defined well enough to make that process, a little bit easier.
Right. From the user point of view, it's not architected. It's like here, and this is what I try and do in Consiliso. So I haven't really laid this one out in Consiliso, but as a user, this is what you have to do as the business process to manage this. And like I said, each geography. Now, if Europe is doing this, is Japan going to do something similar in the future? Australia is doing more integrated stuff right now with like recall and their registration. So each geography. So as a manufacturer, if you're selling in all these geographies, like, how do I design a system that works for all these systems?
Yeah.
And that becomes.
You're supposed to be universal, right?
Right. And the UDI is that number.
Yeah.
In your name, but then you have, if you're a multinational, okay, which center designed the product? That's its ID number, versus this one manufactures it, versus this one sells it. So then, as you become if you're a startup company, you're one place, you're one location, you make one product, it's easy. As you start trying to get complicated, part of it's tax advantages and other reasons, or closer to your customers and supply chain. But then that just adds levels of complexity to the UDI. And so who puts on the UDI? Who's the labeler? Yeah. Well, I'm a startup company in the US. I'm only selling in the US. It's actually easy. You just do it yourself. Yeah. And you don't have a really complex product, but you start getting into complex products. It's like, I think one of the questions is, you guys were asking one question earlier before we started this, is software. So software is a medical device. Does it have a UDI? It should. Now, it would, as you rev the software, its versions, should it have a different UDI for every revision? And that's questions of interchangeability and stuff, and I apply to that. But now you got software going around the world too, and it's different languages, and just dealing with complexity.
That being said, so is that handled practically with the serial number side of the?
That plays, there's not serial numbers. Software is a quantity of one always, so there's not really it's just revision. So you assign a new GTIN number every time you can reconfigure it. Is what the concept would be. Yeah. I really haven't looked into what they've been doing on that for software specifically, but just for typical devices like wound care dressings and stuff like that, it's pretty straightforward, and configuration wise, it's pretty easy. But you start getting devices with software and different electronics and modules, and you change the scope. Now, I've had products in the past where we had one, an external defibrillator, one circuit board, but it spoke to you, told you whether or not how to shock. Well, there was 29 languages, and then you put it into a plastic housing, and then somebody wanted branded, so we had like one circuit board, it became 1,000 SKUs. So what GTIN is it then? Is it 1,000 GTINs or is it one GTIN because it's the same circuit board? You have to make decisions, and that's part of this. Is not every company makes decisions differently, so that's why they left the flexibility in it. And so that's why there's really no common process out there, because medical devices are not the same as any other industry. So if you're in the automotive industry, what do you make? You make cars. You can have an internal combustion engine. You can have an electric vehicle, but it's still a car. What's a medical device?
Yeah, it's so broad. That's one of the things whenever, Greenlight hires a lot of folks like Etienne and myself who have industry experience, but the majority of the people that come to Greenlight, they don't have any medical device experience. So they all go through a new hire orientation. We've got other training in-house to teach them, but that's one of the things I have a session with every new hire that comes in. And that's my first question to them is name some medical devices. And, you get things from defibrillators to knees, to hospital beds, to tongue depressors. I mean, it's so broad and it's so diverse. So folks, while I'm going to take a quick break. I want to remind you, we're talking with Mark Rutkiewicz. Mark is with Innovize and Consiliso. And Mark, while we're taking this break, tell us a little bit more about Innovize. I know you mentioned briefly at the intro that the Innovize does some contract manufacturing. You're in Medical Alley, where thousands and thousands of medical device companies are. And also, I guess while we're taking this break, take a moment to talk a little bit about Consiliso and how that might be beneficial to people.
Sure. So, Innovize, we're a contract manufacturer, been focusing on medical for the last 15 years. Got into it we're a converter, which is when I got here, I didn't even know what that was. It's like, so basically it says bandages, they're a medical device. They're really exempt. But right. How do you make a bandage? Nobody touches it. It's all made by machines. And it's basically taking films and you run them through a machine and you have a rotary die cutter, so you can automatically make these things by the millions. So that's what we do. We print, laminate, we die cut, we laser cut, and can package devices that are more like disposable type things. We do a lot of things with wound care, with diagnostic components, parts that go into pacemakers and defibrillators. We make a lot of parts for that. And we're also getting to wearable sensors now. So sensors, anything that stick to skin. So if you want to stick to skin, you got to replace it every day. Yeah. Where do you get that? A lot of manufacturers make adhesive, but not in that shape. And so they don't. We buy from the adhesive manufacturers, and then we cut everything to shape for our customers, and then document and maintain traceability and all that stuff because it's a medical device. So we have intense quality system on that.
Very cool.
Consiliso is a sister company to Innovize. So we started that after I wrote my books and just have I got a separate website for it. It's cross-linked with the Innovize website. But I do consulting on designing quality systems and reintegrating quality systems. And so it's really more from, if you're growing, where's all your information, your quality system, and what's the best practice? So there is not one thing. There's not one software application that can run an entire medical device company. It's impossible. There's too many different requirements, and each company's different. So there's quality system side, but then there's the financial side, and then there's clinical side and regulatory side, and you can merge a lot of it together if you architect it ahead of time. And that's what Consiliso is about. Is how do you architect everything? Because financial requirements, if you're public or private, can change some of the rules in what you're using on that side. Quality system, are you making a disposable? Are you making software? Are you making, do you have to do servicing on this, capital system? And so your requirements for your tools may change, and that's how do you manage all that? So that's what I do with the Consiliso.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I know we're kind of getting toward the tail end of our topic today on UDI, and I want to throw a question out there because I remember, again, going back when this first became, or when you first started hearing from FDA, this is going to be a requirement, in the next year, whatever the time frame it was, the industry was freaking out. And because I think a lot of people heard, I have to put the UDI on my actual product. And I remember a very specific example, like a pedicle screw. Like, how in the world am I going to put a UDI on a pedicle screw? So maybe it's time to dispel or bust some myths here. Does UDI actually have to be on the actual product?
There needs to be identifiers on the product. What you sell, the sellable object has to have a UDI. So when you sell it, you can the intent. What is the intent of UDI? So it's really intended for the hospital user. So that they can validate that if I tell this, this patient's supposed to get this, this, and this, you can get that. So if in the operating room they have a pedicle screw, they could scan it. Well, it's typically in a kit. If you're doing orthopedic with screws and stuff like that, it's in a kit. You can scan the kit, and then the kit can be cross-linked with that. Now, you may want to look at things up ahead of time. Like when I was doing implantable pacemakers or defibrillators, there was a serial number on the can. We serialized it. But once it was in the patient, could you see the serial number? No, because it was on the can. But we had X-ray IDs at the time. So if you had an X-ray, you could see what kind of pacemaker it was, which manufacturer, and then you could do the telemetry and talk to it and see what device it is. So it's the intent is trying to be able to find the information about the product, and then some longer term is then the patient. The patient, we try and give, we were an implantable device manufacturer, give them an ID card that has, this is what you have implanted in you. Here's the serial number, here's the model number. So the GTIN can be included with that now.
Yeah.
So basically, they know what's inside of them.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you think of it, Etienne? I know you've had to deal with this in some form or fashion in your career too.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I was working on it, I was struggling to figure out, how do we do this? Is it brand new? And my wife, who had, I don't know if I can go into personal details. She actually had a pacemaker at the time and got it replaced. It was 10 years old, and it had the UDI with a 2D barcode. I was like, this is not new, for my career. But I thought that was very interesting. We struggled with how do you, validate the direct part marking on the product, and things like that. It was an interesting world. So, I love hearing what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, the FDA has guidances on direct part marking and what size. We got tiny part, and you can do some barcodes that are, so you don't have to write it all out. You can do some smaller like barcodes that, as long as you describe how to use them, if it's really tiny. But you can also do packaging. I mean, a wound care, a bandage isn't directly marked with a UDI. It's on the packaging that you throw away. So the part itself doesn't have a mark on it. But implantables, you want to track and stuff like that. So you can scan things depending on how it's going to be used. How can you scan it so you can make sure that you're using the right product with the right other products and with the right patient. That's really the key.
One quick thing. So I had interrupted you early on when you were talking about, okay, this is the process. You get this barcode from GS1. You put it on your product. I think I interrupted you at that point. So I just wanted to see if you could sum up that. I know it goes into almost a decision tree as you get into contract manufacturing, but any advice that you can give to medical manufacturers in that timeline?
I mean, what I've been seeing here is, we have lots of different companies that we make products for, and I've seen some other companies that do some contract manufacturing too. And nobody's really standardized. I mean, the FDA, drug side, the FDA says, here's your drug facts. And it has to look like this. So all the drugs sort of look the same. Medical device, there's no guidance on it. It's like, fit it where you can and use these symbols. And you can use the ISO standard symbols now. They don't require you to spell them out anymore on the labels like they used to. But so it's just trying to design labels. And so I think, if the industry would just come up with, here's a stand. If you're going to just create a label from scratch and use something, start with this. If it doesn't work, that's fine, but at least start with that. That'd be a good thing to work with. And actually, I'm working with I work with MDIC a lot. I've been involved with the case for quality. That would actually be. This is interesting that we're talking about. This is like that would be a good project. We're working on a group called the Safe Space Project, and this would be a good one to also look at standardized labeling. And it's just templates. Like if you're going to start with something, start with this at least, versus. People try and come up with designs. I've seen manufacturers, they have no idea even what's supposed to go on the label. Their brand, if they're a startup company. If you're an experienced company, you know exactly what you want. But if you're a startup, it's like, what am I supposed to put on here? And whoever you use as your regulatory person for submissions is typically going to bring some kind of template to bear for you. So
that's cool.
Okay.
But yeah, UDI is typically, we try and do, use the symbols for, reference for the model number, lot number and expiration date, and then just put those exact same fields in there. And most labeling software today integrates that and auto-generates the barcodes within the software. I mean, 20 years ago, no. But today, almost every labeling software all does this. So it's not like everybody knew they needed to do it. So there's a half a dozen labeling softwares that, it's out of the box this way. So,
and they're pretty affordable today too. I remember like 10, 15 years ago, some of the labeling software and the labeling equipment was pretty expensive, but it's pretty affordable these days.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. I mean, that's the thing they've designed and integrated it, and that really helps. Even 5-6 years ago, how do I generate a data matrix barcode? That wasn't available. Now it is. I mean, It's all sort of auto-generated. So a lot of places have it. A lot of places have the tools. If you're big enough, you can buy your own. If you generate a lot of them. And, one of the projects, when I was at AGA Medical doing implantable heart occluders, we ended up redesigning our whole labeling system because we were having errors all the time because we were using the standard methodology where you bought a label that was pre-printed with some information. Then you ran it through a Zebra printer and added more information onto it. It was just horrible. So we just totally changed it and designed an integrated system with a labeling software and basically bought blank label stock and printed it on a standard copy machine printer.
Yeah.
It met the requirements for what we needed. So it was, simpler. It's like, yeah.
Like I tell, it's been a while since I told the story, but younger engineers about when I started, and it sounds like one of those old man stories, like where I walked uphill both ways to school in the snow barefooted. But there were times early in my career where I was literally cut and paste, like having a piece of paper, cutting something out and taping it. It's like, and they're like, "Man, old man, you're crazy." But yeah, it's real. Well, Mark, I think this is probably a good place to put a pin in on the topic, at least for now on UDI. I mean, my take home is, the process is a little convoluted, a little complicated. But from what a UDI is it's not that deep. It's not that complicated. It has a lot of benefit. But certainly if you need some help and guidance on UDI, there's a lot of resources that are out there. You can reach out to Etienne or Mark or even myself. We've been through these things a time or two. So if we can't help you, we'll point you in the right direction. So let us know. While we're wrapping this episode up, of course, I want to thank our guest, Mark Rutkiewicz with Innovize and Consiliso, and of course, co-host Etienne Nichols at Greenlight Guru. And want to remind you too that Greenlight Guru, we're here to help. We have the only medical device success platform on the market today. Well, what is a success platform? Well, it's designed specifically for the medical device industry by actual medical device professionals. And it includes workflows to help you manage your design and development, your risk management activities, helps you manage documents and records, including electronic routing and review and approval and revision control. We have workflows that help you manage all of your quality events, post-market, things like complaints and customer feedback and CAPAs and things of that nature. And it's all tied together. Mark's right. You're not going to find one software solution that does everything that your medical device company needs. But when it comes to managing all of your quality related information, Greenlight is a source of truth, a single source of truth for that information. It's all tied together. So I encourage you to check it out. Go to www.greenlight.guru and learn more about our software. And if you'd like to talk to someone from our team to share what your needs and requirements are and see if we have products and services that can help you, we'd love to have that conversation. So check it out. As always, thank you for listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast. It's the #1 podcast in the medical device industry, and that's because you're listening to it and because you continue to share the Global Medical Device Podcast with your friends and colleagues. So thank you for doing so. Until next time, this is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, John Speer, and you have been listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast.